Turmoil at the top in Oakland. 2 days after Police Chief Howard Jordan abruptly stepped down, another shakeup. Prison realignment under attack. Again, the latest salvo comes from former Republican Lieutenant Governor Abel Maldonado.
I'm here to address an issue that threatens the lives of every Californian.
3 years after the San Bruno pipeline explosion, PG&E faces a record fine for the blast, more than $2 billion. Plus former Bay Area comic W. Kamau Bell, totally honest, totally unfiltered about his hit show, Totally Biased.
You know, as a black person in America, you have to sort of find humor in race or else you go crazy.
Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Thuy Vu. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel are Tom Vakar, KTVU consumer editor, Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle senior political editor, and Mathai Kuruvilla, San Francisco Chronicle East Bay reporter. The sudden departure of Oakland Police Chief Howard Jordan on Wednesday for unspecified medical reasons left the police force, city leaders, and the community in shock. Today, just 48 hours later, Jordan's replacement stepped down, and another chief, the third in 3 days, was named. Mathai, what happened today, and how is the city reacting to all of this turbulence at the top?
Well, what happened today is largely the result of a court order that Oakland has been struggling with for over a decade. And there was an abuse scandal in 2000, and that led to a series of reforms that the city has been unable to comply with for years now. And there's a compliance director that was appointed by the court in March who has tremendous power to fire, even to fire the chief. And the speculation is that he had a heavy influence on both, not only having the chief leave, but also the creation of these, putting in these new chiefs in today. The
appointed person you're talking about, Thomas Frazier.
Yes.
So are you saying then that he went into city officials and said, this person must go, that person must go, that person must go?
Well, we don't know that for sure, but we do know that he has the power to do that. We do know that he was extremely unsatisfied with Howard Jordan and his leadership. And over the course of these last 3 days, the mayor, Jean Quan, and the city administrator, Deanna Santana, have replaced 4 of the 5 command staff in the police department. So Frazier had made it very clear he was unhappy with the command staff, and the response a week later is to remove almost all of them.
But I think the most amazing aspect of this is the police chief Howard Jordan resigning just minutes before this critical report was about to come out, as you reported, saying it's a medical leave that he needed. Would you talk a little bit about that? I mean, apparently everyone was blindsided by this medical aspect. How much more money does he end up with if he has a medical leave? Just a question you got to ask.
Because he's in his 40s. I mean,
he's in his 40s, and apparently no one knew anything about this medical condition.
No one knew anything about the medical condition. We don't know the exact extent of how much money he will get on his pension, but my understanding is because it's a medical leave, there's certain tax incentives to his pension that will kick in.
So is there going to be any sort of investigation into this, or what? I mean, is this questionable since this raised eyebrows in Oakland?
He'll have to prove it to CalPERS, but yes, there are many people raising their eyebrows, particularly because there were 3 reports critical of the police department in the last week, and then he resigns.
Let me ask you one question. There are 2 groups, or one is a person, the other is groups. What does this do for the mayor's standing? And does this give any advantage to the gangs, who have to be probably pretty happy about all the chaos inside the police department, because that's their primary adversary?
Well, I don't know about the gangs, but we do know that we have these 2 separate paths in Oakland. We have the court oversight that's having these tremendous impacts, replacing chiefs and command staff, and at the same time you have a crime problem that's really off the charts. Highest violent crime rate in the state. Burglaries, there were 13,000, I believe, last year in the city of Oakland, and one of the reports that came out this week was that the police department only had one part-time investigator looking into 13,000 burglaries. So, you know, it's for a resident of Oakland, that's not good.
That's an amazing
numbers.
statistic right there. I mean,
it is.
And you know, we've heard frustration for a long time from people in Oakland. I lived there myself on the fact that, you know, burglaries, home burglaries, no response, even from police who want to respond because there's nobody there to help. Is the mayor, as Tom said, I mean, taking heat for this at this point? What can be expected now as you know, the mayor's races are going to start heating up there?
The mayor is very concerned, and so she has. She's pushed for increased police academies. She's pushing for hiring of more civilians. She's very much aware that she has to change the discussion about crime in the months and the year to come for sure before she runs for re-election next year.
Let's talk about the residents of Oakland as well, because I mean this is like blow after blow after blow. What a week for Oakland, and this is on top of the staggering statistics that have come out. I mean, the city had 131 homicides last year, the most since 2006. Robberies jumped 29% last year. Burglaries 43%. It has the highest robbery rate of any major city in the nation, and then now you have this crazy week. What's that like for residents? It's
very confusing and very disconcerting. The residents are really frustrated. I see it on the email listservs. I see it in discussions on the street. It's you know, for many residents, what the court does isn't necessarily their issue. They just want a police officer to show up at their house when there's a burglary, or at least a evidence technician. But, you know, there's these two different paths. I think most residents don't necessarily care about what's happening with the court, but they do very much care about how crime is handled.
And it's not just the court that has gotten involved. I mean, the city commissioned a consultant, a very high-profile one, former New York City Police Commissioner William Bratton. He also came out with findings this week and was quite critical. What were some of the findings, and how will they be implemented, or if they'll be implemented?
Well, I should just also clarify one thing. There are important things to the court order, and this is something a lot of residents care about, which is creating a police department that complies with constitutional policing, and that's absolutely a huge part of what residents want. As far as William Bratton, the former New York Police Commissioner, his report this week identified all these shortcomings in the police department, the lack of investigators, the lack of thorough investigations. You had 10 people investigating 4,100 robberies last year. On burglaries, they weren't submitting fingerprints. You know, there's a 50% hit rate on fingerprints for burglaries, and there were over 200 fingerprints submitted last year that didn't even get put into a database, and there would have been somebody theoretically caught if it followed those similar patterns. Yeah,
well, we'll have to see how this shake out, but wow, what a week for the city of Oakland. Bye, thank you. Abel Maldonado, a former Republican lieutenant governor, took aim at the state's prison system this week when he announced a ballot measure to quash realignment. That's a current program to shift responsibility for lower-level felons away from state prisons to city and county supervision. Realignment has been in effect for over a year, but has been criticized for letting some offenders off too easy.
It is an issue that affects the quality of life and the safety of every citizen of my home state of California. Today will be the beginning and the end of early release. We must act now, and let's put this early release system away.
Well, Carla, why is Maldonado doing this, and what kind of reaction is he getting?
Well, Maldonado, I think, has one thing in his target, and that is running for governor in 2014. He's planning on challenging Jerry Brown.
This is the opening salvo.
This is the opening salvo, and I think it's a dramatic one because this whole issue of early prison release and realignment does have a certain, resonance with people when you're talking about letting out dangerous criminals. Then look, the state's in a bind here. The courts are saying the prisons are overcrowded. Deal with it, Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown's fighting that and saying we don't want to let out too many more people. This isn't. Maldonado knows this is an issue maybe he can get some traction on. And what's interesting about this tweet is, right now, the state is pretty much owned by the Democrats. The legislature, every statewide office. Jerry Brown looks to be in very good shape. He hasn't even declared he's running again. But, you know, if Maldonado doesn't run, who do the Republicans have? Right now, they've got a guy, a Southern California legislator who used to be in the militiamen, the Minutemen, an anti-immigrant group. You know, Latino voters would go running, screaming away from that. I mean, right now, Maldonado has a very interesting life story. He's the son of Mexican immigrants. He grew up in the strawberry fields of Santa Maria. He's a moderate Republican. But he's got that R after his name in California, and even though he's run for statewide office a couple of times here, lieutenant governor, he ran for Congress last time around, hasn't had any luck because the Republicans here are down to 29% voter registration. A lot of them are saying this guy may be their best chance to at least get a Republican sort of argument out there in the election.
Scenario. If something with one of these released prisoners happens that's awful, I know he's been trying to make that case, but let's just assume that one of these people get loose or several and do some really horrific things. Does that improve his position?
Well, I mean, this is the case he tried to make at a press conference this week with a large photo of a convict named Jerome Rogers, an African-American.
We just saw that photo in the soundbite just now.
African-American who it turns out it was a total misstep because the guy was released, had a horrible record, rape and so forth. But the fact is Jerry Brown had nothing to do with it. It was released in 2000. It was sort of seen as a Willie Horton kind of moment. That's the convict that was used in the presidential race, Michael Dukakis and George H.W. Bush. So the fact is that, you know, you run into some of these racial issues, but it is an issue. The prison release issue possibly could work. The fact is that Jerry Brown is maybe sort of a little vulnerable on this issue. On the other hand, some of the polls are showing, look, Californians are saying, we don't want to build any more prisons. We know they're overcrowded. The 3 strikes was great, but we need to do something about the schools. That maybe this public safety issue is not as, you know, slam dunk as it used to be for Republicans.
But it seems like he did have a serious misstep, again, going back to that press conference he had, because of the whole racial issue and using that picture of the NAACP, now wants him to apologize. How has he reacted or responded to that?
Well, John Diaz, our editorial page editor, spoke to him today. Maldonado said he was very sorry about using the photo, but he said he's not sorry about raising the issue. And I think we're going to hear more from him on this issue. You know, Jerry Brown and the Democrats, maybe those are some of the issues they're going to have to face. The economic issues in California, taxes in California. Maldonado's a very moderate Republican. He's one of the reasons we have the top 2 primary right now in California. He was the one Republican vote that voted for sort of higher taxes in California, and he got that as part of the deal. A lot of Republicans hate him for it to this day, think he's a Republican in name only. But the fact is, maybe we're going to see a case where you have a moderate Republican going into Latino neighborhoods, talking about issues, and that could be kind of interesting in the coming governorship.
Does Jerry Brown run?
I think Jerry Brown runs. Yeah, I mean, look, and this would be, by the way,
responded, by the way, to Maldonado.
He hasn't responded directly, but you know, there's no question they're watching this because the Democrats were all over this misstep at the press conference. Jerry Brown's poll numbers are high, and we'd be talking about a historic 4th term in California. So this could be really interesting, considering he's 76. Maldonado's in his 40s. This could be sort of a generational battle.
But, you know, incumbents usually win in California. It's been that case for the last 70 years or so. So we'll see about that.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Carla.
Okay.
Well, a penalty that's been almost 3 years in the making after a 2010 explosion in San Bruno left 8 people dead and more than 30 homes destroyed. A record fine has been proposed for PG&E. $2.25 billion. A panel of the California Public Utilities Commission made the recommendation. Tom, where would the money come from? It's a staggering amount. And what kinds of improvements would PG&E use it for?
Well, first of all, they've already spent $1.5 billion making improvements, and they continue to spend. The money is not in the bank, according to the CEO who I spoke with earlier this week. They'd have to go out and raise that money. Now, you have to ask yourself, investors looking at PG&E and saying, okay, they've got to come up with basically 10% of the value of their company. This company is worth about $21 billion in the stock market. They've got to come up with 10% of their entire corporate value to pay off a fine, and part of that is going to be to improve the system. But what's interesting about that is that you have to look at where the money's going. About half of it would go for continued future improvements. On all of this will be paid by shareholder dollars. About $1 billion would go directly into California's general fund. And here's where some criticisms have arisen. The California Public Utilities Commission, an absolute creature of the state of California, is up to its neck in culpability in this thing. They were not fair-minded regulators of PG&E. They were way too cozy. PG&E would ask for money for something, and then they wouldn't spend it on that because of some other circumstance and all of that stuff. And they kept asking for things, for money to be paid to do this, to do that, It was granted in rates, and a lot of these repairs were never made. And primary example of that is a pipe that is finally replaced in South San Francisco that would have probably failed in a major earthquake, and that was one they got $5 million for and never replaced the pipe. So a lot of people are saying, wait a minute. California needs the $1 billion to say the least, but is it fair for the shareholders of PG&E to supplement the budget of the state of California rather than to fix the system? And that's where a lot of people, including the CEO and other people, say this doesn't make any sense. Plus, and this is a harder one to swallow because this is how lawyers look at cases. There was a death of a man up in Rancho Cordova a few years back, and the penalty for that, him and the destruction of his house, was $38 million. If you just do a straight mathematical analysis, this fine should probably be somewhere between $300 and $400 million, not $2.25 billion.
When the PUC officials acknowledged that, saying that they found more than 100 violations, and if they had taken it violation by violation by violation, it would have been a really staggering sum, like you said. But PG&E could never afford that, so that's why they reached $2.25 billion.
Right, and that's perfectly okay, and a lot of people support that idea that the penalty to the shareholders has to be so great that never again will this or any other utility undertake to put profits ahead of safety and all of that stuff. The question is, if that $1 billion goes to the state of California, is it not better spent, put into the ground to make the system better? Is it not better spent to improve and enhance safety, monitoring, more valves, more of the things that would prevent a real disaster from happening? And some people simply say, this is the state of California trying to cash in on something that it's partially responsible for.
And how does the PUC defend that?
Well, the PUC says that we are the PUC. This is the PUC that's in place right now. This is the PUC not of 50 years ago when this mistake was made, not of 25 years ago, not even of 5 or 10 years ago when we were cozier. This is what we have to do. We take our oaths very seriously. We take our office very seriously, and therefore we are going to make sure that this message gets sent, and that is a legitimate message to make. The point is, if PG&E has to borrow that money at a very high interest rate and has to borrow money to improve its system at a very high interest rate, that money, a lot of that money, especially for improvements, is going to come out of the hide of ratepayers.
Tom, so much more could be said about this, but I don't want to let you go because I know that you've also covered the Bay Bridge. I don't want to let you go without touching on that. Big announcement about the Bay Bridge this week as well. How are they going to repair it, and how much is it going to cost? And will it open on time?
It's not sure that it will open on time. They still think they can do this work, and basically what they are going to do, instead of having bolts holding down this earthquake brace, what they're going to do is they're going to wrap a saddle over the sides of it, literally a steel saddle, and it will be tied down to the pillar that holds the whole bridge up. It'll be tied down with 400 of the very strongest cables that there are. It'll probably be as strong or stronger than the original design. Will it work? Very likely it will work, according to engineers I talked to. But this is monumental in terms of the size of work that has to be done, and therefore it is going to take time. And the question is, can they make it by Labor Day? It's anybody's guess right now, but they say they can.
Well, and the cost, I guess, $10 million, and hopefully
$5 to $10 million, which is way more than the million they originally estimated. But most of the engineers that I've spoken to, and it's been quite a few, say that that's a very good ballpark figure.
Okay, sounds good, Tom. Thanks for the update. Well, if the name W. Kamau Bell rings a bell, that's because before going to New York to host his show, Totally Biased, the stand-up comic called the Bay Area home. His long-running one-man show, The Bell Curve, Ending Racism in about an hour, Ran in San Francisco for years, Bell was discovered by comedian Chris Rock, an executive producer of Totally Biased. The show is back on the FX channel for 7 weekly episodes before going to a daily schedule in the fall. Bell was back in San Francisco recently and sat down with KQED's Joshua Johnson for some laughs, which we'll hear in a minute. First, a clip from Totally Biased with W. Kamau Bell.
This week, the state of Mississippi shocked everybody by passing a landmark piece of progressive legislation.
148 years after the Civil War, Mississippi finally ratified the 13th Amendment. That's abolishing slavery.
Oh, and I know what the 13th Amendment is. I keep a copy of it in my wallet in case I ever have to go south of Maryland. And if I lose that, I have a tattoo of it on my chest. Back when I was working out. Never.
W. Kamau Bell, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
At what point did you first realize that race could be funny?
I think that's just been a part of my life. You know, as a black person in America, you have to sort of find humor in race or else you go crazy. So I think it's just always been a part of my household.
When did it become something accessible that you realized, oh, I can work with this, I can do something with this?
As a comic, I was just trying to do things that were funny, and I sort of went back and forth talking about race a lot, not at all, because it was always a difficult subject to sort of like get an audience to want to engage in a long form way. Like you could make individual jokes, I felt, or I could, but I couldn't get like long form pieces out. And so when I wrote the W. Kamau Bell Curve, Ending Racism in About an Hour, which I did every night, people really were able to sort of understand the context of what I was talking about, and then the jokes were hit harder.
Whenever we talk about racism, we usually focus on like level 5 racism. That's the scary racism. The racism we read about in the history books. The racism we see on the 11 o'clock news. We call that Texas racism. But what about all those other levels of racism? We never talk about those. Like level 1 racism. It happens every day, usually around the water cooler, at the Xerox machine, often while holding a latte. We call that Berkeley racism.
There's something about being the black guy with something to say that means something culturally that I don't know if you find that endearing or empowering or restrictive. How do you view that?
The minute you step on stage, your vessel determines a lot of what the audience expects from you. And then it's your job to either play into that or subvert it. And I feel the more aware you are of what the audience expects of you, the more you can have fun playing with it. And so for me, like, you know, there is a cultural history of the black guy with something to say, but there's not really a cultural history of the big black guy with something to say.
Right.
And I think over time I learned how to do that. As Chris Rock said about me talking to somebody else, which I thought was a great way to put it, he's like, Kamau can express anger with a smile. I want to express my anger, but I have to do it in a way that doesn't clear the room.
I think when we imagine the first black president, I don't think we imagine it to be Barack Obama. I think, especially black people, I think we have some idea that the first black president would be some, like, you know, like they get the DNA of Martin Luther King Jr. and splice together with a young Cassius Clay and put Malcolm X's brain in there and raise him to Detroit, and you'd be like, I'm the black president! Ah! You're like a superhero.
When did you start getting interested in stand-up?
I mean, that's probably, once I found out you couldn't actually be a superhero, like that wasn't a legitimate
That
job
was
option.
it?
Yeah, when I was like, I want to be Spider-Man or the Incredible Hulk. Oh, you can't be that? Then I'll be Bill Cosby or Eddie Murphy.
There you go,
Yeah.
which I think gives you more power.
It does give you more power, yes,
Exactly.
yeah. You know, Bill Cosby could buy and sell Spider-Man if he wanted.
You were born in the Bay Area, you were born in Palo Alto, bounced around a lot.
Yes.
Came back, and now you're in New York.
Yes.
Doing Totally Biased. Yeah. How much did the Bay Area play into not only your views of race, but also your views of comedy?
I mean, the Bay Area comedy scene is legendary, you know, going back to like when the Hungry Eye was a jazz club, you know, so the Bay Area, like Lenny Bruce, I think we were the first place to arrest Lenny Bruce. We have that honor.
I believe so.
Yeah, so the Bay Area comedy scene has been since the dawn of, since the modern era of stand-up comedy has been legendary, and still to this day turns out great comedians. Like,
intimidating
like
comedy
this
scene?
guy.
Exactly, you know.
No, it's a really, because the scene, at least when I was there, it's gotten a lot bigger because of the internet. It's really small and welcoming, and if you sort of like show up and show loyalty and show talent, the scene embraces you. And also, if you, generally we like nice people, so like it's not really cutthroat. If you're a good person and you show loyalty to the clubs and you show talent, the scene really wants to promote you. The Bay Area comedy scene really likes raising new comedians, which a lot of scenes don't. They just want to find great ones.
So you catch the attention of Chris Rock.
Yes.
Who decides, this guy's got something, I can do something with this.
Yeah, apparently that's what he decided. I was doing my show, The Bell Curve, in New York at the UCB Theater, and as a comic, after you get to a certain level of comedy, you're only like 1 or 2 degrees of separation from every other comic, because all comics work with younger comics. So I knew people who knew him, but he was still like a hologram to me. Like, it wasn't somebody that I could talk to. So he came backstage at the end of a show I did at UCB. I didn't know he'd been in the audience. And he sort of floated backstage dressed in black like it was the Matrix. And
which he may well have been.
Yeah.
Right.
And he said, yeah, you're funny. And he sort of threw it away like that. You're funny. He's like, and I don't think a lot of people are funny, so take that for what it means. And I was like, I'm going to quote you on that and put it on everything I have.
Exactly.
And then he's like, where do you live? I said, San Francisco. He said, move. There's nothing there. And by that he means there's no industry here, which is true. I would stay here if there was an entertainment industry here, but there's not. There is a little bit, but not an active full-time industry that can employ lots of people. And you can't make like a national TV show out of here, as much as I would love to.
You've also described yourself, and I have to admit, I'm not sure I like this word, partly because it probably applies to me too, as a blurred, a black nerd.
The minute you say blurred, you actually get access to a lot of other black intelligent people. And I want access to those people.
Okay.
And I want those people to know that I'm there for them.
So it's about opening the door.
It's about opening the door. And then once you get inside, do whatever you want to do.
Right. Totally Biased is about to go to 5 nights a week.
Yes.
It's a big vote of confidence from FX. How do you view your next steps? Where do you want to go from here?
I just have to get better at all aspects of being the host of Totally Biased. And every television talk show host had humble beginnings, and every television talk show host who's been given the time to get better has gotten better at it, and then finds their own style and becomes the brand. FX is going to give me the time to figure out my brand, and I appreciate that because I got to get better at all aspects of it.
W. Kamau Bell, Totally Biased on FX, 5 nights a week. Congratulations. Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
Funny guy. Well, that's all for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you all for being here. And visit us anytime at kqed.org/thisweek for archives of our show, to subscribe to our newsletter and podcast, or share your thoughts and story ideas. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.